Welcome to SHOWstudio. It's our final roundup panel of the menswear season, and we're going to be talking about the Paris shows. A lot of the themes of these roundup panels so far has been what a strange season it was and how much change is going on in fashion. And I think that was something that was obvious in Paris as well. There were designers who were notably missing off the schedule. There was a lot of conversation about sort of how people are going to be showing, how they're going to be structuring their brands. But also it was a really great season in Paris in some ways because it is such an eclectic city when it comes to fashion, particularly men's fashion, where you see so many different brands with so many different points of view, from the big luxury houses through to more independent labels. But before we kind of dive into our discussions, I'll let my amazing set of panellists, starting with you, Andrew, introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Andrew Davis. I'm a menswear stylist based in London.
Hello, I'm Dal Chodha. I'm a fashion writer.
I'm Carlo Brandelli and I'm a designer.
All different aspects of the industry, I like that. So what do we think of what's happening in fashion, particularly in menswear at the moment? There's been so many conversations about, menswear's never been better, it's thriving, it's doing amazingly, but the show system isn't working and what have you. What do we think of what's going on and all of that discussion? Dal, what did you think when you were sitting looking at all those
I
shows?
think these discussions are very good and valid, and they need to happen. And I think menswear being a slightly smaller, neater schedule, if you like, if you're comparing it to the women's, it's a good opportunity to almost try things out, I think. And I think menswear designers have up and coming menswear designers have maybe kind of benefited from that slightly smaller kind of spotlight that has been on menswear in the past, and been able to be a little bit maybe more experimental with how you do a presentation, for example. I was quite amused by a lot of the presentations for New York men's, and how kind of basic a lot of them seem. They seem very sort of early LCM. Which sounds like such a stupid thing to say, but felt very 2008 or 9 or whenever it started. In terms of, you just had boys standing in a room next to breeze blocks in a studio, and I thought that felt very early menswear presentation, and now the presentation, as it were, as an alternative to a fashion show, is of course so much more developed.
Do we even need presentations or shows? If menswear's doing so well but the shows aren't, or maybe they are, depends on your perspective, is it still necessary to have shows at all or presentations at all?
Well, I think to answer that, you could just look at Loewe, because in the way that Loewe and M&M Paris and Jonathan Anderson collaborate on the presentation of the collection, and I thought it was really exciting. So every season the lookbook that is printed and beautifully bound in linen and is given out in a limited edition to those of us that attend the presentation for the first time was released on iTunes, and it was there was a digital version, which I can't believe they hadn't done before, but it was just so smart because it actually meant that there were so many more people could now access this thing, and I think a lot of what Jonathan does is so much more about opening fashion for the fans and all of those other people. But I think what they do is super smart, and every time I go to the Loewe showroom, we're there together often, I just think, God, this is kind of what everyone should do.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Because it doesn't feel like that kind of exclusive show that doesn't really have it feels like,
and you can touch the stuff and you can look at it, and there are models there wearing the collection, and these images go some way into kind of adding, I guess,
very editorial.
Absolutely, So I think that, for me, every time I see that, I just think, I think a lot of other younger labels, and maybe some more established ones, could take some inspiration from that format.
What do you think as a designer? What's the designer's perspective on all the change?
Well, as you were asking us that question about do people need shows, we were talking a little bit off camera about it. Do designers need shows? And I was thinking back, talking to Andrew as well, because we go back into the 90s, don't we, Andrew? About what a show and what presentation is about. And I suppose, as I thought about it, talking to Dal, it was about access. Who has access to see this show? And the designers and the businesses, because they obviously are businesses, they do the show for the media primarily. So when these shows started, well, if we take away salon shows, let's just talk about fashion shows. When should we say fashion shows started? Late 70s, early 80s? Yeah, probably that kind of period. The access is for the media, and then the media tell the masses. That's kind of how it worked. So it's very exclusive. And we're now at a point now when everything is very inclusive, because you've got Instagram, everybody can see it, everything is live. So actually, yes, what is the point? Exclusive is obviously linked to this. Well, do you think exclusive is a positive word?
I
'Cause
don't
I
know
have
if
a
people see it as
specific
equating with luxury anymore. I think for a long time, if something was hard to access, it made you think, oh, I want that more. I don't know if a younger consumer thinks like that. I think
or wants it,
Yeah, exactly.
or thinks it's even valid.
Yeah.
Because as I think about this word exclusive, it actually means that you can't see this or you can't be part of this. And that's really not the sentiment of the world that we live in at the moment. So attaching that word to luxury in any way, it's maybe not the right thing to do now. I've been thinking about, I didn't do a presentation for one of my clients, Kilgar, this year because actually I didn't want to do one the year before either. I've only ever done one show in Paris, which was 2008. I think the whole idea of, as a designer, showing this information to a select group of people is kind of unusual. You either want a lot of people to see it, or everyone to see it, or why should you just show a few people so they can comment? I think it's this idea of who should be commenting, and now anybody can. So it's thrown the whole thing up in the air. Actually, I don't have a particular opinion about why you should show or why you shouldn't show or how you should do it. I just think that you should use the medium of the time, which now is all these
Pokemon Go.
Yeah, maybe we were talking about that earlier, and see where that takes you. It's going to be interesting next couple of years.
I bet JW Anderson will do something with Pokemon Go next season. He'll like stream his show.
Those characters will be wearing.
Oh god, yeah, it's very him, isn't it?
Wearing genders.
But I do agree with you. I think there's this problem with the show system is it is actually quite hard to make it work across those channels, and often you see brands and designers trying to shoehorn a show onto those channels. So like they set up a hashtag, or they do like a live, they'll live stream it on Instagram with like live pictures and stuff, and it does feel like sort of, as you say, not properly using the channels.
There's so much pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, when did Business of Fashion start their website?
Well, Imran's been doing it as like a blog for ages, but it became kind of more formalised, I guess, in the last like 4 to 5 years. Very, very formalised.
That was a seminal moment for me as a designer, because you have this word fashion next to this word business, and of course the two have to work hand in hand. But most designers and creative people, everyone sitting on this panel, probably most people watching, you're creative and you design because it's an impulse that you can't suppress. Then when you have to include the business as well, it kind of puts all these restrictions on you. So it's difficult to understand what you should be doing when you get to a certain point. And now that the media and access to all these shows is so saturated, I don't even know if there's going to be a backlash. I mean, talking to Andrew off camera earlier, the first shows you went to, Andrew, in the 90s, we were talking about. I mean, can you even think how it felt then, watching those shows for the first time?
I think, well, my take on things is that I think we see far too much these days, and there's no excitement anymore. The whole thing in the 80s and the 90s was the newspapers report on the shows that day, so you'd see an image from that show. You wouldn't see those clothes again until you saw them in the shops. And so all that mystery is gone, and that excitement of looking for stuff. And I think that we're far too saturated with imagery too quickly. We see too much too soon, and there's no excitement anymore in anything. It's all there for you.
We're spoiled, aren't we?
So is that a bad thing, guys?
For me it is, because I liked that initial seeing something and then seeing it in the stores,
that excitement,
6 months later,
and you want to wait, that feeling of anticipation. Has that gone from fashion?
And I think everything's too instant for me, definitely.
So what do we do? What do you think designers should do?
Well, that's what I don't know, because I think on one hand I agree with you. Like, I'm much more of that kind of I like things to be a bit slower and a bit more silent, and like I think a lot of people were incredibly jaded this season, and it is true. Like, you sit at a show and you should be feeling so excited and kind of like thrilled and overwhelmed, and you're just sitting there being like, checking your phone, you don't really want to be there, and you think, God, how spoiled have I become? So I very much agree with you, but then I also think it's like you can't stop the tides, and the tides are turning, and so it's like I do think people have to work within the context of that immediacy and that thirst, but I do worry the long-term effect it will have, not so much on high fashion but on like design and creativity, because we are seeing a point where high fashion labels are now working to the same schedules of fast fashion labels or high street, and you do think what happens to, it's interesting when Carlo was speaking, what happens to that one creative person who wanted to be like, who's in the middle of it all, having to listen to the media and the business people and like the merchandising person, all of those people saying this is how we have to do it. What happens to them in all of that conversation? And that freaks me out a little bit.
freaks me out more.
But I think,
scary,
I just think it's
scary.
our perception as well, because, we're seeing it all, and we might have, we have a history with the show, and we're kind of knowledgeable on the history of how fashion was.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly the problem, is that although I am the editor of a magazine called Archivist and looks at archives, I'm very much about the future, as we all should be. And I think too many of those jaded people at the shows that we know and sit next to need...
Are you talking about the media?
A lot of it, yeah. And I
definitely.
get so angry when people look really pissed off at a show. I just think, come on, this is
why?
not, we're not on the front line. You're not working in A&E
Yeah.
in Walthamstow. Like,
Yeah.
put a smile on.
Yeah.
This is not that hard.
Yeah.
Yes, it's tiring. Yes, I nearly died at Islamiyaki, as we all did, because it was so hot. But really... This is
I
not
really
as
didn't
hard
think I was
as
gonna make it
so
out
many
of
other
that
things,
show.
and I think so many people have
Yeah.
lost sense of fashion in context of life and what is going
Yeah.
on. So, I think we talked about it maybe on another panel, Brexit, and that announcement that
Yeah.
happened during the shows.
Yeah.
At last, there was something that you could buffer fashion off of.
Yeah.
You could actually kind of look at those clothes against what was actually happening in the real
Yeah.
world. It wasn't just
Yeah.
this bubble of, I really love that top, I love that lapel. It actually
Yeah.
became a more serious conversation. It's like all these articles about Theresa May's wardrobe. Some people on there are kind of very sniffy about that, saying, "Oh my
Yeah.
God, she should be more than fashion."
Yeah.
But actually, no, she kind of loves fashion, but she's still,
Yeah.
in charge of
She
the
looks like
country.
she's wearing Balenciaga, I think. And I don't think she knows that.
But there's that thing of kind of, it goes back to that thing of, it's very, people don't like to be too, when we look at fashion, I think people would prefer it if we were all a bit stupid and
Yeah.
airheads, and the Ab Fab film and those things don't do us any favours,
Yeah.
because they really perpetuate this dopey stereotype that really doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Really doesn't.
Sorry, Dal.
Yeah.
I want to say something just to see what you all thought. There's been a lot of punk references in collections this year. It's 40th year, is it?
40th year,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the punk movement, although I was too young to be one, I observed it because I was young. There was a lot of morality in punk.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of the people that were punks were vegetarians. I know this is the word that people throw around now, and they were
Vegetarian?
very Do they not throw it around anymore?
I think we've gone to vegan.
It's
haven't we?
vegan or
Yeah,
gluten-free
macrobiotic.
and
But
shit like that.
those things existed. So design, as it was happening, and those trends that were being created, there was morality behind it because it came from the street. Whereas this word business now that infiltrates everywhere and everybody has to think about business all the time, maybe it's changed the perception of morality and what you should be creating. I don't know for the better or for the worse. As you say, we have to move with the times. But where would be the natural ending to where we are now? If all designers stopped doing a show, or they kind of close their doors and then they just invite specific people to come to the show.
Yeah.
Well, these were the salon shows of the 50s and 60s and Dior and where fashion started. I mean, the Lagerfeld show during Pitti that I went to, the photographic show in the Pitti Palace where fashion shows were created in the White Room, that was the birth of the fashion show in that salon. I don't know if you know that White Room, you've been to that White Room.
Yeah.
And again, that's very exclusive again, isn't it? Just these 40 or 50 people can come and see it. I kind of don't know if that's particularly relevant anymore.
No, I don't think it is relevant at all. I think it's interesting when we talk about like morality and I think that is something that fashion needs to understand about society, and often it does feel like these clothes are so removed, as you said, from like conversations that are actually going on and the way that people actually shape their identities. And I don't know who's getting it right out of what was on in Paris. Was there anything where we looked at and we were like, that's brilliant?
Calm, I think, was brilliant.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that we would like as creatives.
As
but
creative people.
I think other people out there can understand it, not necessarily creative people.
Well, the great genius of com is that it's so commercial, but also not at all when you look at something like this. But then there's that huge part of com that is like business genius.
And it's
like,
with every fashion show that's ever been held, in the past 20 or 30 years. It's, it's crazy fashion, and then there's always a commercial collection to support it.
They've been consistently good since she started.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Do you remember in the early days she used to invite all sorts of people to come and do the shows? I did a couple. Did you do one, Andrew?
Oh no! To be in the shows.
Yeah, to be in the show.
I've seen lots of people in shows. Yeah. No.
And
wait, you modelled in them?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, there was lots of people that did them at the time. I think I was in the McQueen one.
So
in
cool.
94.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots, but because she would just, the idea of street casting wasn't something that was, it just wasn't a term. But she would, and her caster was the wife of Peter Smith, who was a fantastic hairdresser in the industry, still is now. What was her name? Oh, who also did the press? I can't remember. Anyway, they would invite all sorts of different designers, people from walks of life. It wouldn't be actors, it wouldn't be celebrities, it would be people that would work behind the scenes that were recognised as doing something specific. And they just felt very, very real.
Yeah.
So you put a creative intention with something real, and you have a proper balance, and it kind of feels authentic, and it always has, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah.
Going back from those seasons.
Yeah.
And it still is. I think Yoji is another one as well.
But this was interesting. I do want to talk about Yoji, but also I just want to, because I feel like the big statement of this collection was this kind of Emperor's New Clothes thing, like the fact that it was all kind of like see-through and almost disappearing, and basically the finale they were all just wearing boxer shorts, and it was that I thought was kind of interesting and political, and she's a political designer. In the context of sort of everything we were talking about and everything to do with that fashion week, because it's like, it was very much this idea of, you know, what makes something actually good and what is genuinely good, and why is something in fashion. And I thought that was interesting.
But it's good because it's, as much as menswear can be shocking with the hair and with the see-through stuff, but at the end of the day it's supporting an accessory, which is that Nike collab sneaker, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what it's promoting, and that's what it'll sell.
Yeah.
Even though thousands of people will buy clear plastic jackets and God knows what. But I think that it's that thing of shouting about something to launch an accessory, like Loewe do or like Vuitton do. Or, I think that's... Yeah.
Is that a sustainable way of working though? Because that's another weird thing that would, like, going back to what we were talking about with, you know, the kind of current state of fashion. It is so strange that we all accept this thing that, like, the clothes themselves don't really sell, and we all just, like, pretend like it's not happening.
Well, they do sell. People that dress the windows for stores have a specific budget, and they go into the windows. So somebody buys them. Nobody wears them. But isn't it great that we all see them?
But it's so weird. Is that, like, I do think, are we ever going to get to a point where the clothes actually sell, or is that just something that we need to, like, accept is not going to happen?
Clothes used to sell.
Yeah.
You know.
But I think, you know...
I think
did.
They do sell, but I think maybe they're dispersed across the world, and you don't really see them.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the sadder things of this kind of pace and this exposure and this lack of, let's say, the opposite of exclusivity, is inclusivity. I think it's forced a lot of labels to think in a more commercial way, because their clothes and their ideas are being exposed to a much bigger audience, of course. So once you take those kind of 50 to 200 journalists, experts in inverted commas, out of the equation, who you could afford to kind of maybe push things that you would know that they would understand. You know, your audience was much more erudite. They came to the show, to your collection, with a set of cultural references that they just know. Whereas now, that's not happening so much, because you've got everyone looking at it, and we all come from completely different walks of life. So we're not all necessarily going to look at an Eitor through presentation and go, he obviously loves Stanley Kubrick, which he obviously does. But not everyone will recognise that. And I think that's the difference, is that maybe there's a certain sense of being safer with the references, because you don't want them to you don't want to alienate anyone.
I think also that's why people are so much less political, because it's like everyone is scared to do anything with clothing that could be, like, misinterpreted or seen as un-PC, and everything's shared so quickly that, like, the instant reaction to it is so important. And I think you do see, that's why Com's a really interesting show to go to, particularly because Paris is, like, right at the end of the season, because it is one of those ones where you don't quite know what you think about it as soon as you see it, and you can't work out instantly. And as much as I do agree with you, like, the big thing that everyone talked about walking out was that the Nike shoes, there's also all these messages and ideas that are, like, wrapped up in it that take quite a while to think about, whereas all the other shows, well, not all the other shows, but a lot of other shows, it is just like that instant thing that can appeal to everyone, that everyone can understand. And
also, a lot of us aren't given the time to think about it, because you've got to upload your copy or your review or your report within a few hours. So none of us really have, even the greatest critics that we've got that are working, even they, you know, their real skill is being able to kind of think of something to say in an hour. And I think that's not necessarily a good thing for any of us, because even they, I'm sure, would benefit from having if they're so smart with an hour, imagine how much more insightful these reviews would be overnight or a couple of days. You know, it's that Raf Simons no time incubation period that designers need, journalists need, stylists need to think of ideas for their shoots. But now you have to do it really quickly, so you look at that and you go, right, red netting, clear, that's my fashion story, and you're kind of like, well, that's really not what she's saying. We react we're almost reacting in a way like hashtags. We're just breaking things down into little bullet points, bite-sized pieces.
It'd be interesting to understand with Com if the because obviously, you know, even though the collections are in this transitional phase, or how the shows are going to be done or presentations, the designers will still work in this long period thinking about a theme for 4 to 5 months from season to season. It'd be interesting to understand how designers are now coming up with these creative ideas, these first semiotic messages. Is it just a few seconds, as you said, so that you can just paraphrase in a couple of images and you understand straight away what the message is? Or are they building it through layers? Because still in fashion colleges today, and this is the way it's always been taught, is that, you know, designers have been taught to come up with this theme, research the theme, and then make a collection to build it through the layers, so they start to understand how to construct a business as well as a body of conceptual ideas. So, but as you see this show now with some of the others, you almost immediately understand what the image is in 1 or 2 seconds. It's just not the media and the opinion formers, it's everybody understands what's being said. And Com, because she's a big business, she's been going for a long time, she also has the luxury of being able to be this creative. With the business behind her. Either you're a very young designer and you have no business and you're living somewhere where you're poor and you can say exactly what you want, so the business is not of any importance to you, or you're established and you can say something quite dramatic. It's everyone else in between,
in the middle,
which I think is squeezing the ideas that we're talking about at the moment, perhaps.
But that's why in Paris I find it most exciting to go to, like, you know, Rick Owens' show. And Rick Owens was like particularly good this season because that's someone who is like, you know, so independent, but also so established in some ways. And I find that the way he's run his business, and like it looks like, you know, it couldn't be anything else, but then it's so removed from that, it feels very removed from that whole business thing because it's his and he owns it and he makes all the decisions, and that's kind of amazing. To
just be able to continue to do that at the level that he does it at is actually quite mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
There are very few designers that you
and he's developed his own tribe of followers.
It's insane.
From teenagers to 60-year-old women that, you know, spend £60,000 on a fur coat.
Yeah, it is amazing. There's that thing that Joanne Fennis always says about it being like a lifestyle brand, and like it's like the next Ralph Lauren, basically, because it's like this entire world that you live in. But that is like the conviction of vision.
But also the craftsmanship and the quality is always very high. So as long as with the ideas, it's the quality, super important.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have been seeing quality suffering in the last few seasons with shows and presentations.
I don't know.
Off camera, we were talking about the quality being very high.
Yeah.
With the shows that you'd seen down.
Yeah.
Yes.
So quality isn't suffering.
Yeah.
And that's a
it's
luxury.
the ideas that are suffering, definitely.
But anyone that's outside the fashion industry that are looking at these roundup panels would say that these are incredibly creative shows and presentations.
I think the issue is actually with the buyers, for me. It's kind of the buyers that are taking less risks, obviously, because you can understand the economy the way that it is globally. And I think that actually does a disservice to the consumer, because they actually are dumbing down. You know, there are lots of people that want to wear that as that is, but they don't really get the opportunity because they don't really know where they can buy that full look from unless they're next to a Rick Owens store. Or I think that is one of the problems, access. Although it claims that we have this massive access to things, if the buyers aren't really investing in these designers, in those looks, in that aesthetic.
Do you think they ever have?
I think some might have done back in a few years.
If you think of like Mrs. B and like...
But even if you go to Dover Street Market now, I mean, for me, it just looks like Selfridges. There's very little in there that feels like it.
But your eyes so developed.
Special or
but your eyes
bizarre.
very developed, and you understand that has become a standard way to present something. If you go back 10 or 15 or 20 years, these minimal environments where the messages were very clear, it wasn't normal.
It wasn't, but then I think what people do always is rest on what it is that they've created, and then I would argue that, you know, the whole point of Dover Street was that it was a rule breaker, it was a disruptor. So I was really quite sad of the shop that they've just opened, because for me, obviously they have had a huge influence on retail, the way it looks, visual merchandising, they're buying, but there are very few labels in there that I'd never heard of, and although it is my job to know of a lot of these labels, I'm not as good as I should be on a lot of them.
Yeah, you want to be surprised.
And a lot of the stuff that they were selling in there, I felt like I could go and get sold to me in a different way in Selfridges and in Liberty. So I didn't really know. I wasn't shocked.
Do you not think also part of the problem is, like, it's really interesting to get your opinion on this as a stylist, so it's like we the fashion pack, because we sit there and we praise all these clothes and we're like, oh, this is brilliant, you should care about this. But fundamentally, like 90% of people who work in fashion attend those shows wearing jeans and a black t-shirt, as I'm doing today. And like we don't actually really have that much faith in the clothes that we're talking about, and it's like, if we don't wear it, who's going to? Like, I think it's become the kind of ultimate standard of fashion is to look like you really haven't tried and to be wearing like something that is very plain, like vintage Levi's and a jumper. So it's like, well, like you don't see, you see Rick Owens' kids at his shows in full at Rick Owens, but you don't see fashion people, like, you know, you don't see editors sitting there in, like Joanne maybe, but like, and I think that's interesting. It's like, if we don't actually have conviction in wanting to wear it, if we want to look like so much like we haven't tried, then how can we convince other people to try and make that effort?
No, I know what you mean. I mean, I'd love everyone to wear Rick Owens.
But it is that, I just think it's like we don't encourage people to experiment, because I do think the ultimate standard of cool, and that was, you know, what kind of made Saint Laurent work, was to look like you don't care and look like you haven't tried. So it's like, and that's what's maybe interesting about someone like Gucci or someone like Rick Owens, like Alessandro Michele at Gucci, is this idea that it's cool to like really care about your clothes and like make some effort again. And I feel like,
but I think Rick Owens is a tricky one to kind of even copy or imitate. As we've said before, like Gucci's a really easy, accessible one to kind of have a go at yourself and stuff. And do you worry about the effect that all these changes in fashion are going to have on styling? Because like, especially something like see now, buy now, like, do you feel like you're having to be less creative? We're talking about designers being less creative, but what I think is that a lot of the brands that we all used to work for seem to want to do everything in-house nowadays.
Yeah.
And it's people that are just used to working to a schedule and not having any creative input. And so that excitement and that creativity's kind of gone, I kind of feel like. I would hope that in the future, just because of all the changes, things like Burberry would kind of still work with their stylists and their teams and make things as exciting as possible, whether we see things on a stick or it's a film or, you know, I think it's a very difficult time for imagery and creating great imagery.
I really agree with that. I think everyone's just focusing on such short-term goals. It's like selling this collection, like, you know, building profits over the next 5 years, which in the great scheme of things is a very short amount of time, but like the long-term thing of like, you know, if you think of like Com and Yohji in the 80s, you know, in like 1982, completely changing how people saw fashion. I can't imagine something like that happening again. Like you having this like wave, this like huge change, because everyone is thinking so short term. They're not thinking, I want to change fashion, I want to change our aesthetic taste level. They're just thinking, I want to flog a load of bags and like, you know.
Well, I was quite in to counter that in terms of the Vetements, you know, Demna's Balenciaga. Because I didn't go to the show, but I saw pictures of the show and just thought, oh God, no. This is just silly for me. It looked silly. And actually, now I went to go and see it in the showroom, and it was utterly beautiful.
Yeah, it's really good.
And I found myself kind of looking at this knee-high heel boot and thinking, you know, your immediate reaction, of course, is, God, that's so extreme. And then I was really, you know, then you start thinking about history, and you just think, well, you know, David Bowie wore them. And actually, at a time, that was obviously new to someone to wear a heel as a man. Those shoulders, we had big shoulders in the 40s, the 80s, whatever. So why can't they come back now?
I like it because it's extreme normal. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you look at it and it's all like quite normal stuff, and that's why Vetements works. Like, you know, jeans or tailoring. Yeah. But it's really warped, and I actually find that more interesting than someone doing like a kind of big reference or like citing a design, like an artist and doing a whole collection. It's all about garments and clothes, like Vetements, you know.
Yeah. And this just felt like a new proposition in terms of for right now. And in that way, it felt really exciting. I was really kind of, you know...
It's an interesting phrase you just used, Lou, extreme normal, because I think that does give the collection balance. You have normality and you have something that's extreme. You've got both ends of the spectrum. And maybe that's what culture, that's as people, that's what we're looking for now. We're trying to find some kind of balance. Things have been up, things have been down, look at the way... well, let's not talk about all the political issues that we've had to go through in this country, because they're obviously not affecting most of these European designers are not going to be affected by what's happened here. But getting this balance, maybe readdressing this balance, as we were looking at this imagery, I was trying to think about the seminal moments in menswear over the last 40 or 50 years, and you could probably count them on a hand, even that. Let's talk, what are the seminal moments in menswear over the last 40 or 50 years? And in 30 or 50 years from today, will this be seen as a seminal moment in menswear?
Do you not think the seminal moments, they tend to be the ones that come from the street? I think that's why people continually reference punk so much, because it was probably the last real seminal moment. Like, maybe people will talk about the current thing with
Japanese deconstruction for me, late 80s, early 90s, was seminal. When I first saw Izzy, Yoji, Com completely deconstructing these architectural shapes, that was seminal. Armani was seminal.
Seminal, yeah.
Okay, you can go through each decade and probably pick one or two out. Talking with Andrew earlier off camera again about Arena magazine.
Yeah.
I think it captured those 3 or 4 years from 96 to
2000.
really captured a particular type of seminal menswear as well. So,
but that's fashion moments rather than. I think what's interesting is when you see a fashion moment that gets combined with a social moment, and that's what punk is so interesting. And like, I wonder if you will see that again, like that. You know, something like.
I think it's happening because every part of culture now, and artistic culture, is thinking about social topics. It's impossible to link the work that you all do it's impossible to link the work that you do, to not link the work that you do to how you're thinking socially and politically and morally. This has become impossible for us to do as a society.
But thank God for a twisted priest. Do you know what I mean? It's like we needed it.
Yeah.
We're all talking about it. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, you can't see there, but the construction and everything is kind of genius.
It's beautiful.
And the styling is brilliant, and I want to shoot it. It's the first thing I want to kind of call in, which is great. So I'm going to give it coverage as much as I can. And I didn't want to see just a normal show anyway. If you're going to make the effort of putting on a show, there's no point in showing 50 suits.
Yeah. Do you think because they've got like the explosion and the attention on Demna and Lotta, his stylist, and Balenciaga and Vuitton, the sort of like it's such a meteoric rise. Do you think that speaks about kind of the apathy that people felt about what else was going on? That something like that people were so desperate for something new that like I do think people have seized on this a little bit.
I think we were desperate for something cool because this and that community and that gang, you know, Balmain was a separate gang. Balmain wasn't particularly cool, I didn't think. This is cool. I think this is interesting. I think this kind
Why is it cool? Is it cool because it's lofty and it feels a little bit like, you know, we're too cool for you? Like, is that...
No. I think it's quite inclusive. You know, a lot of their Instagram posts are very kind of normal things. It's not like me and my gang, which I think Balmain was. It's like, we're a gang and we're beautiful and you're not. Whereas this is like, you can do this.
Yeah. And they do champion a different format.
And the fact that it's real people, it's like, it's great that it's a mix of models and street cast and not a new thing, but isn't that fantastic that we don't see typically beautiful people in a fashion show? And that it's
I think that's what's really hard about all the race issues that they've had with people talking about the lack of diversity, because I spoke to Lotta about this and I think she felt a degree of frustration that, you know, what they've done is very much about championing people who would never have been seen as traditionally beautiful, but then because of the...
As long as they're white.
Yeah, what do you think about it?
I mean, it's a bit boring to kind of, I think, it's just, it's crazy to me. I don't even know, you know, the new Valentino campaign is divine, but it's just, you know, all white. And I don't want to be that, you know, the brown person on the panel that's like, this is really awful, I don't feel represented, because I don't really care enough. But I do find it really problematic, you know, if I was just a kid into fashion and I was looking at this and I didn't really feel like I was kind of in it as much. There is definitely, this is exclusive, you know, it excludes people, like a lot of fashion does. And I think that's partly what makes it cool.
But I don't think they purposely thought it's an all-white show. Like, as a stylist now, we're quite pressured to be quite inclusive. It's like, you know...
Well, this is my issue with it. With such a big company, you know, it's not... I'm not blaming Lotta or just one person. But there should be someone in marketing or someone in this huge company that kind of goes, oh, guys, let's address this rather than let's just not.
That is what's interesting about Balmain, is you talk about it being kind of like, you know, we're a gang, we're so cool, we're so beautiful. But say what you want about Balmain, I think the reason it's been so successful is it speaks to people who just fashion did not speak to before, and a lot of those people, you see them at the front row, like there's like they're kind of like sports stars or rappers, and they're people who, like the kids who are obsessed with them maybe never really felt like a designer made stuff that was like cool to them.
Well, there were kids growing up that looked at Versace and Moschino and that attainable wealth and luxury that surrounded that label. So this is the modern version.
Yeah, but he is so diverse in the type of beauty that he pushes, and I think that is really, really brilliant, and has done so much. I think that his casting has had a huge effect across the industry. and that's important.
But looking at the menswear, it's like, who really is going to wear it apart from a basketball player or a sports star?
I've recently started watching Rich Kids of Instagram, which is the most horrific television show.
And they wear it.
They wear it.
Yeah.
Really?
And it's, out and out. That's who's wearing it. And it's amazing. It's so fabulous.
It's funny because it's so modern in so many ways, like as a brand, how it works, and the people it champions. But it's so old. Like, it's so... even like the gender ideals that it pushes, like the girls are kind of like these like trussed up dolls, and I kind of find that fascinating.
Yeah. But loads of women loads of women are fine with that. Women that aren't in urban cities who have Whole Foods around the corner and are sort of waspish in their political views.
Oh, yeah.
They're quite happy looking sexy for a guy. They want to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think the press is largely kind of the echo chamber that I always say. We're all kind of sharing political views potentially, or views on these things like gender and this and that. And so you really only get one-sided. So if you are just kind of this sexy girl who lives in Hull, let's say, and all of these magazines you're buying are saying, right, you should be a feminist and you should do this and you shouldn't really try and dress for men, it's really confusing because actually everything else around you says the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think this speaks to those people.
But that's another way that fashion, I think, is so removed from contemporary culture, because there is such a pop feminism happening across fashion, like particularly women's magazines.
Yeah.
Fine, brilliant. Like, it's great that feminism is being talked about. But I also think it is a bit of a problem that the rest of contemporary culture is so completely removed from that conversation. Like, it's never been more sexualised. Like, if you look at what's on TV, it's like Love Island or like Geordie Shore.
Fergie's milk
if you
video.
if you look at what's happening in music, it's incredibly sexualised. And then fashion is pushing this kind of conversation that is very much removed from that. And I think that's fine. And I do think it's brilliant that fashion is encouraging women to, talk about feminism and think about their gender, but then also I think fashion needs to acknowledge how sexualized things are and kind of look at that and try and actually unpick it and take issue with it, rather than just kind of again being...
Well, this again relates to kind of what we've all been saying is who is at this show and who is the show for, because this is the problem with, traditionally, as you mentioned, the brands like this were never really paid much attention in fashion in recent history, I guess, because they weren't fashionable in the way that we might expect them to be. It's very hard to sit there and judge this and critique it without coming across as a complete snob, really. Because ultimately this talks about culture and class, all that stuff that we tiptoe around all of the time. And this is aspirational, it's crude, it's vulgar, it's fucking fabulous.
When you say class, do you think the problem is if you critique it, you look like you're calling the people who like it stupid?
Yeah, and also you're kind of saying that you shouldn't have an aspiration to dress in this way. You shouldn't want to look wealthy. All right, the version of wealthy might be a kind of slightly dated one, but having worked in Brazil and having worked in India and having worked in Chicago in the Midwest, all of those places that have this new wealth, this is how women and men want to dress. And so I think that is not necessarily a conversation that fashion has, because it's, I don't know why we don't have it, but I think part of the reason is that we tiptoe around these bigger things.
Do you agree with that?
I think it's a bit vulgar.
Yeah.
But there's lots of people in Cheshire near my parents' house that probably want to look like that.
But then I kind of think, what's wrong with that? Like, and also the rest of fashion needs to acknowledge that a bit more. I think, either really take issue with it and go, this is disgusting that people aspire to this, I want to really change this and offer them an alternative, or engage with it. But my problem is people go, oh, well, that's how the masses want to dress, but I'm going to make this thing for a teeny tiny set of liberal elite people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's a strange one. What do you think of Browne, Carlo?
I think I can see a lot of different cultural references here. I think it reflects the way that the culture is at the moment. There is so much available to everybody. You can just see everything. I think there's something for everybody there. Even if you didn't understand fashion or weren't particularly paying attention to fashion over the last 15 or 20 years, you can understand that that's how we view culture now. It's very fast, there are a lot of references, kind of anything goes, and when you speed things up, you invariably lose detail or quality or focus. I think that's just natural. If you're going very, very fast, you can't pay attention to the things that are important. If you remember how we used to flick through magazines 20 years ago, you'd sort of go at this pace, take 3 or 4 seconds to go through a magazine. Now on Instagram, you know, you're going like this, you're seeing 10 or 15 images maybe every 6 or 7 seconds. When Instagram launched, they would only show a film for 15 seconds because even nerdy businessmen that invented Instagram understood that the attention span of most people was a few seconds.
15 is quite long.
Well, they've changed it now. It's a minute.
Yeah, now you can do.
And Snapchat, isn't Snapchat 5?
I'm actually not on Snapchat. I'm like an adult.
Oh, okay.
I know.
So speed.
I can't bring myself to. But I do agree. But then what's interesting with this?
SHOWstudio is though.
Yeah, SHOWstudio is on Snapchat. SHOWstudio is. Check it out. It's very good.
But SHOWstudio still champions stillness, and there is calm within a lot of imagery.
Yeah.
You know, so you can process the information, the visual information that you've been given. And again, to adapt your eye for anybody, and everybody has, that you focus your eye into what you can see, the amount of information you can actually take in. And this is affecting how image makers are making images. I mean, Andrew, as a stylist, are you making the same sort of visual image now as you were 25 or 30 years ago? With the same
that I hold on
ideas?
to quite a bit of stuff, which is, you know,
You hold on
like
to, yeah.
a lot of my work was always like my upbringing and teenage years, like, so it would be sportswear
Personal
and
as well.
so it's quite personal. But I think, I mean, over time you become slightly more commercial because you have to and stuff.
But do you not think, I really feel like, particularly in photography and image making, I don't think people are trying to create like iconic imagery anymore. Like, I think when people are making, there's so few campaigns since I've worked in fashion that I think will go down in history as like really iconic, beautiful images. Like maybe some of the Celine ones, but more for the quirkiness of them and for like the kind of cultural nods, less for like the actual image. Whereas if you look at photography in the kind of 90s, there's so many images, like, you know, Corinne Day, Kate Moss, Nick Knight, Yoji, like that stuff that is so amazing. And I wonder if the imagery of this generation, it just feels like that, again, it's quite churned out as well. Like, I think there are brilliant image makers working, but I wonder if they are given the opportunities to make like an incredible image.
I think some people are like Jamie Hawksworth definitely has a lot of freedom, and those, you'll remember those images because the quality of the pictures is beautiful and the styling and the lighting. And yeah, I do miss Bruce Weber Versace campaigns because I think they were the most beautiful thing in the world. But they started to work together again. They did a film. So I think we're going to see that again.
And they
definitely.
did the Teenage Mom campaign.
I think you're too close to. We may be too close to it now to edit all the imagery that is around at this moment. I mean, when you look at things from the 70s, 80s, 90s, you now have the ability to look back and pick out a few things. I don't know if the people that made images or the people that did creative work at that time realised that they were making seminal imagery. A lot of them, because a lot of it was by accident as well. Let's not forget, you know, the creative process. You know, you press the wrong button, or you do the wrong thing suddenly. So I think we need some time and perspective. In 20 or 30 years, you'll be able to pick out the seminal looks of this period, and that's when it's going to become interesting, because the change, this cultural change in how fashion will be perceived. I'm still not sure how I feel about selling things on the internet, quite frankly.
Really?
Yeah. Or buying things from the internet.
What do you mean?
I know, my God. Well, because it seems like such an emotionally empty transaction. You know, it's a flat screen, and it doesn't matter how many images you take of that product or that design, until you actually get it and see it and feel it in your hand and have some emotional engagement with the object, that experience has been taken away.
Even buying a garden hose. Or we just talked about clothing.
Yeah, I use an old-fashioned watering can.
But then I do. The biggest thing I agree
No, we're
with
talking
that.
about clothing, Andrew. Fashion, of course. It has to be so emotive for so many people.
But then do you not think, I agree with you there, and I think it is definitely affecting people's expectations of their clothing. I think people increasingly wear things that don't fit them correctly, or they know nothing about fabrics, and people care much less about touch. But then the brilliant thing with the internet is it does mean that brands can sell to people who never, like, who frankly couldn't come and pick up the thing and try
access
it
is incredibly important. I'm talking about the emotional, because we were at the beginning of the conversation we were talking about what excites you, and it's not just who excites the media and people working in the industry, it's what excites generations and everyday people, whether you're watching dance or you're watching sport or you're looking at fashion. It's to have that emotional connection to what is happening. And I think fashion on the internet, and I notice there are some very big websites that have done very, very well, but I'm sceptical. I'm interested to see what's going to happen over this next 10 or 15 years, because in the same way that fashion shows maybe now will stop, maybe internet shopping, and I said it here first, folks, maybe we're going to go back to stores again, and that emotional experience, and something smaller and something honest.
Well, that's Dover Street as well. If you think about Dover Street, part of the reason it's been so successful is because it doesn't engage properly with e-commerce, and like it's all about like this kind of fashion.
There are still queues of people outside Palace, for example, every weekend, and Supreme. And I think maybe in that world, there's definitely still that value to going physically, making a pilgrimage to a store and buying something, which is really exciting to see that still does happen.
Accessories is easier for sure, and objects and trainers. But I think when it comes to clothing, you have to try them. And so much of fashion is emotional. You have an emotional connection to what you're doing or how you want to be seen to be wearing it. You have to try it on before you buy it. Why do it the other way round?
But I think that emotional connection is different to, obviously, as a designer, yours is about the cloth, the fit, all of those things. But I think a lot of people, that emotional connection is looking at a photograph and going, oh, amazing.
Yeah,
that's the emotional connection is super
or it's
short.
seeing a cool person that they value wearing it, and then they're like, cool, and that's where the emotional connection to that garment
It's a different connection, I guess, that maybe may...
Is it any less real, do we think?
No.
To actually be in the presence of whatever you're engaging with before you take the decision. Sorry, it's way too conceptual.
No,
cut that out.
I can't bear people in shops sometimes, so it's quite easy now that I know what Rick Owen's size I am, and I know that it's always going to fit, and I order it online, and I don't need to go into a shop.
I think a big thing of it, that we're not talking about is convenience, and I think that is the thing. It is just. Yeah, like making things fast. Like everyone is so used to having things so fast, and I think that's across all aspects of consuming. Like you're used to being able to email someone and get a reply within like an hour. You're used to being able to order food and get it within 10 minutes. You want a taxi, it comes within 1 minute. Like you go on Uber, and I think fashion has to understand those broader models of consumption and either bring those into the physical space, and that's fine, or serve them in an online capacity. But I don't think we live in an age where people expect to have to make an effort to get something. I just don't think that.
Well, it's like Lou when you were in Valentino at the couture, and they were telling you that some people didn't want to come.
Yeah, people don't want to come and do the fittings. They just don't have time.
So couture clients are not wanting to come over for fitting. So
well, we get that in bespoke as well.
Yeah.
Because
that's why Ralph and Rizzo has been so successful, I think, because they do like less fittings and they kind of understand that. I was reading something on that. It's interesting.
Well, it's this idea about access. Is obviously I've been involved with bespoke for a long time. One of the things that I do, if
I'm wearing Kilgore today. This is a Kilgore t-shirt.
Oh, thank you. Vintage.
Shout out.
First time round.
It's from like, I don't know. I can't remember when it's from. It's from like a year ago.
Oh, okay.
Keep going.
I forgot. You've got me now, Lou. I've gone.
Sorry.
Bit of
we should talk about. There's a lot of shows that we haven't talked about.
Givenchy explain.
Do you want to talk?
Givenchy,
what do you mean by Givenchy explain? Were you not a fan?
No, it looks great. I feel sorry for all those people that were sat there for 2 hours waiting.
It was there was a long, but I kind of liked that. I was like really freaking out at the time because it was so late, but it felt like a proper show.
It was kind of fine when Talia Vodnova kind of walked out in couture, having had a baby 2 weeks ago. You were like, okay, we could have waited 2 hours.
I like the way they show the couture with the men's.
Yeah,
I think that
that's a good idea, definitely.
I also think it's really interesting. We were talking about this on our London panel. I think Givenchy is having more of an influence on the kind of not necessarily on the clothing, but on the kind of like type of guy that is having a moment with young designers, like this kind of like butch built guy who wears like gymish stuff and like is quite masculine. I think that's more relevant than we realise and more exciting to sort of young designers. Like you see it a lot, I think, in London, and that I found quite interesting. It wasn't my favourite show of some of the men's ones he's done. I loved not last season, the season before that, like the prison themed one.
But in terms of the political message, these are all kind of close-up scans and patterns taken from currency, so from the dollar bill. And so there is this kind of thing there talking about money and commerce and how much these things might mean to people and wealth, and so there is that there, just as legitimate as Rei Kawakubo's message, but obviously presented in a very different way. But there is still that kind of message coming through from from the collection. And again, you know, it's a huge brand that has an awful lot of product that it needs to sell, and in that way I think the show was a success because it kind of was a good showcase for the bags and the trainers and a lot of the separates. You know, there's a lot of great kind of pieces here that a Givenchy man shopper would buy for sure. So in that way it was quite successful, but within the fashion,
it's its own thing though. It's kind of like Balmain in that sense of like like Riccardo Tisci does what he does, and he does it well, and he does it consistently. So it's almost like it is removed slightly from what is going on elsewhere. What did you guys think of Vuitton? It was interesting. We talked so much about punk, and there were a huge amount of punk references in that show. There were the mohair jumpers, the collars,
the dog collars.
I think it's really beautiful.
I loved it. It was my favourite show.
Out of anybody, this is a show that people should look at. You know, young kids who in fashion, looking to work for big companies. This ticks boxes. This ticks boxes from the CEO down to the person that buys it in the street.
It's so clever because there's so much
and for the fashion person.
Yeah,
it ticks
exactly.
Boxes.
Yeah.
And then Kim's talent is these tiny little accessories that he does that go with things that you'd hardly see, but you know, like an aspirin necklace and stuff. He's genius, and that's what sells. And then the way that he works with luxury and works with all of these fabrics and stuff, with crocodile, with the skins and stuff, I think it's great.
I think you're right. Like, I was interested because they did another Jake and Dinos Chapman collaboration, which is the animals that you can see. I think there's like 4 or 5 animals. There's like a rhino and a zebra, and it kind of speaks to that African influence that runs through a lot of Kim's Vuitton's collections, because obviously that's where he was born. But what's interesting with the Chapman collaboration is it's very much pushed onto accessories. So you see it on a lot of the bags. There's a lot of beautiful little key rings. There's a lot of little coin necklaces. There's belts, and that's really, really interesting because it's like, how do you, when you're a brand that tries to sell your goods as something timeless, how do you then also get people to come back and buy them again? It's like, once someone's got a Vuitton belt, how do you make them buy another one? And I think what Kim does so successfully is he never undermines that sense of like Vuitton being, you know, like it will last you a lifetime and it's so luxury and it's so well made. He doesn't undermine that by sort of churning product out, but then you can see that Vuitton guy that wants the bag with the rhino on it, you know, that luxury shopper, and I think he's very, very good at that. And I love the punk stuff. I think that was brilliant, and I think it felt really authentic there because he does collect so much of the punk original stuff. So yeah, I really, really liked it.
And the plastic monogram, you know, he's not afraid of using the house monogram, which is amazing.
I know.
Yeah. And I think women will be buying those monogram coats as well.
I think women love the accessories. Like I have one of the collars from that show, and it's kind of amazing. It's like a Vuitton monogram, like sex collar, basically. It's kind of amazing.
Beautiful.
What else did we like? There's a lot we haven't talked about. We didn't talk about Janya, we haven't talked about Dries.
I really loved Haider Ackermann, which isn't on your list.
Did you? Let's talk about Haider Ackermann.
But partly it goes to what's the point of shows, when you're there, how does it feel indifferent to anything else? Of course, there are the more performative designers such as Tom Browne, which I guess...
Tom Browne was the best show I've ever been to.
Which we will mention.
There was a man dressed as a shark. It was fabulous.
And some seagull men. But Haider's show was in, I can't remember where it was in particular, but it's just that sort of a backdrop that only Paris can give you, really.
Yeah.
So it felt very French and beautiful. And actually it was interesting for me because I didn't sit in the middle where all the seated press were.
Yeah.
I actually went and stood kind of from a different vantage point with the standing tickets, which is normally kind of seen as a bit of a, oh my god, you've got a standing ticket, how horrific. But in most cases, depending on the show space, you get a much better view. And so I think that's partly why my perception of this collection is a bit different to those of you that were sitting in it. Because actually seeing it all, and actually just because the show was outside and it had been raining constantly, hadn't it, for a couple of hours. So there was, all the seats were covered in plastic, and you know there were lots of nervous PRs running around, and they saw a break in the sky and the clouds breaking, and they just whipped the plastic off and just did a show, and it was just so, it was like that, and that energy that they put into just rushing it in a way to getting it done quickly, and the combination of the really kind of hardcore techno that was blaring out so loudly into this huge kind of courtyard, and the flashing lights and the possibility of rain and the wet floor and the choreography. The boys were walking into it when then all of a sudden a girl would come out down some stairs, and it looked utterly chaotic, but it had such an energy to it. And I always love Haider's colours, and I love love the look, which is a very difficult one to pull off, but I just thought it was beautiful.
But again, it's that thing, I think maybe this is the theme to our conversation, is Paris is the place where it's like everyone does have a very strong sort of like an individual identity. Like Haider does what Haider does. Like you could recognise a Haider look from miles away and you could never think that it was like anything else. And it's the same with Rick, and but you don't really get that in London. Like you scatter a load of catwalk images on a table and tell people to try and work out which designer did what, other than like maybe Craig Green. It's really hard to know, and I think that is what's so interesting about Paris, and that sort of like strong conviction and message, and that's more important than ever.
But as a menswear statement, this is great for me as a stylist to use for a musician, or it's a great thing to latch onto. And it's like a new tribe, I feel, which is quite interesting that he's developed.
What else can we talk about Thom Browne, because I loved it so much. There was a man dressed as a shark.
Is there a video? Is there a video of Thom Browne anywhere?
Yeah, is there a video, because it was so
Did they
fabulous.
video it?
So yeah, my favourite bit is when he like stood in front of the photographers and then he like turned his shark head and looked at them. it was the best thing I've ever seen. It was so good. But that I think is so. What's that? That's freaky.
Oh wow!
But I think that's what's really great about Thom Browne, is like it's a proper performance.
Yeah.
But also like Thom Browne is someone like, you actually, going back to what you were saying, Carlo, about like who's actually changed menswear. Thom Browne has like had a huge effect, I think, on how men dress, like slimming down and shrinking. That skinny grey suit. I think it has been like a small revolution in menswear. Yet he does these incredibly creative shows. Yet is the most commercial, just like an incredibly commercial designer, and that I find really interesting. It's a bit like Com in that sense.
I think there's also a lot of pressure on the label, because it closes Men's Fashion Week.
Yeah.
And literally by that point on a Sunday, as I said, the people that are there kind of rolling their eyes for most of the week are still rolling their eyes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people kind of need to be freshened up.
Yeah.
And Tom definitely takes that on and delivers a show, a performance that you can love or hate. But I think it's really interesting that I think what a lot of the designers we've talked about, what I love about them is that you have a reaction to them. I think there's an awful lot on the schedule, like there's an awful lot in life, in art galleries and things like that you just sort of look at and you go, okay, yep, that's a painting. Yeah. And that's it. They don't make us feel anything. But I think it's it's impossible to go to Thom Browne show and not feel something.
I like that he doesn't care about whether people laugh at it. Like, this was deliberately funny. Do you know what I mean? Like, he often does things that are ridiculous or that novelty.
You don't imagine him to have a sense of humour, but
no, but he does.
Yeah, he must have a twisted sense of humour.
Definitely. I really want to revisit the shark. It was honestly my favourite thing, and they played the Jaws music. Look at him.
So it was a real spectacle. It shows what the media want to see.
It was insane. Look at him there. He's doing his little head turn. So and Stephen Jones always does the best hats. So amazing.
But I thought technically as well. I mean, I don't want to ruin the surprise, but there's a moment when all of the boys come out and they're all wearing kind of wetsuits, which they then peel off to reveal their looks, as it were. And
then they peel them off
again.
Then
they peeled them off. Yeah. And so that was the thing that really kind of made it a wow moment, because you were like, oh my God, they didn't look like they were wetsuits. They didn't look like they were constructed with a zip up the back.
Yeah.
They looked like separate pieces. So that was really exciting as well, because technically, I mean, I'm assuming they will be made as separate pieces for commercial.
Yeah, but the show is so removed from the kind of realities of, like, I think what people buy from Thom Browne. So yeah, those are the wetsuits which then get removed again.
Yeah.
But it's a great statement for this eyewear that he's selling.
Oh, that's very true.
He always loves an accessory straight on it, front of book.
It's all about accessories.
So was it a strong Paris season, do you think? It's been I think we've all acknowledged it's a really weird time.
I think it was, definitely. I think there's lots of new players. I think Margiela's gone through a lot of changes but still sustains a massive business, and it's quite fashion forward and interesting to look at.
Yeah, I like the Margiela show.
Junya and Com kind of rule as ever. And then the English in Paris, it's great that JW's there and Kim. I think that's brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a great season.
Yeah.
There's lots that I want to shoot by.
I agree with you. It feels like the problems are with the system, and I hate that like loose word, the system. It's not with the individual designers. Like, I felt like people had kind of ploughed on regardless and actually made some quite good stuff. I have to ask you, while you're here, what do you think of Justin O'Shea going to sort of get a design job when he's a street style star.
What do you all think?
I'm just intrigued as someone who's like a proper tailor.
That's not the only thing I do. What to say about these appointments? I don't know. I think that culturally everything is changing. People's perceptions of what brands and things should be is different. I think time's got a great way of sorting these things out. So we'll see, right?
That's a good note to end the panel on. Time's got a good message. Should we give the designers a round of applause for giving us so much?